Welcome to today's video. In this video, I would like to quickly talk about the Mona Xpeng launch versus the Onvo launch and why everybody right now is super bullish on Xpeng versus NIO. And NIO, everybody is really in a sentiment low, right? And as you can see with the stock here, Xpeng is up 150%, while over the same period, roughly 6 months, NIO is down 5%. So everybody really excited about a launch of the Onvo sub-brand for Xpeng, which has been done in a strategical different way than the Onvo launch. Like Xpeng decided to sell them in the current stores, and last time I went to China, I actually also checked it out in the store. By the way, I want to emphasize that I'm not bearish on Xpeng here, or I'm not looking to bash the company, but I want to offer a second view of the Onvo brand launch because everybody now sees it as a failed launch. I mean, there is truth to it in a sense that the management of NIO has guided towards much higher expectations for Q1. But I think we need to look a little bit beyond just the revenue metrics and the actual sales numbers and look a little bit deeper of what this potential of these sub-brands means for both NIO and Xpeng in the future, right? So one interesting fact about Xpeng here, about their sales or actually also the financials, was that when they reported Q4, we could see that the net losses are actually very similar to last year's. So they haven't even improved that much compared to how much the top line of Xpeng has improved, with all of the sales really rising. So great year-over-year sales metrics, right? But the top line stays roughly the same. So no improved profitability here on this metric, really. While everybody seems to get excited about Xpeng stock due to the top line growth, due to the revenue growth numbers. But what I want to point out here in comparison to the Onvo sales and revenue numbers, that maybe this look at the, for example, the weeklies that are being reported, where we only look at the sales metrics and with that, the revenues in mind and the growth according to that, that might be a short-term thing that we, possibly want to dig a little bit deeper here. So let's look at that. The first 6 months compared of the Xpeng Mona M3 versus the NIO Onvo L60. So this is just using ChatGPT for a moment here. It basically gave me the rough estimations that Mona was selling 60,000 units in the first 6 months, maybe exceeding that a little bit, and NIO roughly 30,000 units, maybe exceeding that as well a little bit. But I mean, rough comparison here, Mona doubles the sales compared to Onvo, right? So you always get those record numbers by Mona each and every day. They're now on the weeklies on the top of the sales rankings. So that's why I think many people are really getting excited about this successful launch of the Mona here. But if we look a little bit at the profitability metrics of that car, and I've done a video about that in the past, only looking at Xpeng and comparing it to their internal metrics, like making some R&D projects for Volkswagen, we can see, like, with an ASP, an average selling price of 150,000 RMB. So one of the reasons why they're selling more of these, simply because they are more affordable and cater to a larger audience of the mass market. Total revenue roughly here at 9 billion renminbi, versus the average sales price for an Onvo car is slightly higher than 200,000 RMB. So it's a much more expensive vehicle, despite the fact that it's a more affordable NIO brand vehicle, right? So it would bring in at 30,000 units, roughly 6.6 billion RMB here. Now, we don't get the right vehicle margin published for the Xpeng Mona, but I asked also ChatGPT here to take a guess for vehicle margins in that segment, and it told me it would be between 5 to 10%. More on that in a second. So I'm taking the middle here, 7% of a vehicle margin, and that would give us a gross margin contribution of 630 million RMB, and in USD, that's roughly 90 million USD in contribution, meaning discounting the sales, not the sales, the cost for producing the vehicle after what is the income of the vehicle, you get 90 million of a contribution that you can take in order to pay for marketing, pay for R&D, pay for overhead and such, right? So that's the contribution margin. Now for Onvo, for 30,000 units, that would land us at the 6 billion total revenues and a vehicle margin that I'm assuming here at roughly 10% based on what we got in the latest earnings call as a statement. So the overall vehicle margin of NIO is higher than that, but they already mentioned that Onvo has made great improvements on the vehicle margin. So I'm assuming 10% here with the potential that this can be higher in the future. So the contribution here would be already 660 million RMB, which is higher also in a USD value here, higher than 90 million that it's contributing to what NIO can use in order to pay for sales, R&D, marketing and stuff. Obviously, what NIO is spending there in sales activities, marketing, R&D and so on is much higher than what Xpeng is spending. That's why we also got the high net losses last quarter. But again, the net losses of Xpeng have not improved that much dramatically compared to last year. So the fact that here, despite the fact that Mona is selling double the amount in actual units, the total revenues are not that great and also not higher than if you look at the vehicle margin and the gross margin contribution in the end, than what Onvo is doing at half the units sold. Okay, so if we look at a more maybe realistic case, what could be in the near-term future, I would actually say that the vehicle margin of the Mona could be lower than the 7%. It could be actually at 5%. And I think it's quite realistic that Onvo might reach a 13% vehicle margin very soon. So with that, you can see how quickly the spread of the profitability metric per vehicle sold is almost getting double in the favor of the NIO sub-brand here, Onvo, as they will be making 120 million roughly versus the 60 million that Onvo would Mona would make at 60,000 units sold versus 30,000 units sold. If we also look a little bit more in the future, if we assume that on an annual basis, Xpeng will be able to sell 260,000 units of the Mona, so that's a pretty good run rate, given at where they're currently at. And maybe NIO manages to scale the Onvo to 180,000 units, which puts them roughly at a 15,000 monthly delivery. And assuming the same vehicle margins and so on, you would see that Xpeng would be earning around 270 million in contribution margin via the Mona sold, versus Onvo would make almost coming close to 1 billion, 710 million based on those unit sales in the future. And that would be more than double, certainly, for Onvo in net contribution margin compared to what Onvo is making, what Xpeng is making with the Mona brand there. So that's a kind reminder that the overall sales and revenue metrics are possibly misleading regarding the potential of these sub-brands and whether or not there are a success. What's the fact is that Mona certainly has more traction right now, and it's keeping the sales more steadily. That's one point where investors are more happy about, I guess. And the question marks whether or not NIO will manage to ramp up the Onvo sales in the future. But other than that, I think what NIO should come out and start publishing might be actually the revenue and net contribution margin tables on a weekly basis, comparing it to the other brands, because it's kind of misleading to just look at the sales and the top line revenues. If you look at this example here of Xpeng versus NIO Onvo, where you could say that even at maybe those more the more conservative metrics here with a 7% vehicle margin for Mona, although I'm doubting that, versus 10% for Onvo. It's roughly the same what you get as an outcome, even at lower sales for the Onvo brand, which cannot be the target of NIO ultimately, that's for sure. But I just want to remind everybody of these, very important contributions. Ultimately, once NIO manages to cut back on the expenses when it comes to sales, marketing, to R&D, and so on, which they have started their initiatives, and their overhead will be lower than in the future, you will see that those positive contributions of the net sales of Onvo and NIO brand will really drive profitability also on the very bottom line of NIO. So that's the ultimate look out there, the future prospects there. While again, unfortunately for us NIO shareholders, everybody just seems to look at the sales metrics and the growth in there, and of course the question marks around NIO's future there and the Onvo brand, having the result that Xpeng is now a 20 billion market cap. Congratulations to that and everybody who has invested. It seems like investors can get excited about that sort of growth, but whether or not that will be the end game and the ultimate sustainable solution, we'll see, and we are about to find out. So thanks for watching, and see you in my next videos.